At the outset of America's entry into World War II, the government decided that the Thompson submachine gun was heavy, it was hard to produce, it was expensive, had a lot of moving parts, and decided we need an all-metal, very simple, foolproof submachine gun. So they called in General Motors, the Inland Division, and a gentleman named George Hyde and another gentleman named Sampson, and they decided to develop this submachine gun in response to the Army's requirements.
The Grease Gun offered not only low cost, but it could be manufactured using modern techniques very quickly, and it was simple. But even though we introduced something that was simplified, it still wasn't quite simple enough. And so this very simple and inexpensive submachine gun was made even simpler with the introduction of the M3A1. And the M3A1 Grease Gun looks almost just like the M3 Grease Gun, with one notable exception. And that exception has to do with the way that the bolt is cocked back for firing. During World War II, the M3 Grease Gun serves in the configuration that we best know, which is the configuration that is equipped with a crank handle on the right side of the weapon, the crank handle which is used to pull the bolt back to the rear firing position, because it is, after all, an open bolt, direct blowback submachine gun. Well, the experience of combat demonstrated that that sheet metal crank handle was a bit of a weak point. If a soldier or a Marine dropped the weapon on that crank handle and broke it off, suddenly the operator has no means of cocking the bolt. And so this very simple and inexpensive submachine gun was made even simpler with the introduction of the M3A1. And the M3A1 Grease Gun looks almost just like the M3 Grease Gun, with one notable exception, because on the M3A1, that crank handle from the M3 has been deleted as unnecessary, a superfluous part. And instead, they compensated for it by simply machining a finger hole into the side of the bolt so that the operator had only to stick his index finger into the bolt and pull it to the rear.
You go into the Korean War, and the M3, in particular the M3A1, is the standard issue submachine gun of U.S. forces. And that's where Ithaca, best known for its double and pump action shotguns, became a submachine gun manufacturer, and Ithaca was given a contract during the war to manufacture the M3A1.
After the Korean War, the M3A1 is our standard submachine gun, and it's being used by mainly Army units, although there were some Marines who had M3A1s, grease guns, in Vietnam, and there are stories of these being used in different units, National Guard units, all the way up into the 1990s.
The M3 submachine gun today is a prized collector's firearm. Anyone who goes down the route of collecting U.S. military firearms from the Second World War, from the Korean War, or from beyond, they would always like to add a grease gun to their collection. So if you ever have the opportunity to see one in person, or to, let's hope, fire one, they provide an experience that is unsurpassed, an experience that will automatically take you back to fighting on the plains of Western Europe in 1945, or fighting in the streets of Seoul in 1950, or maybe even riding as a tank crewman in the desert in Saudi Arabia in 1991. The Grease Gun covered that really impressive spread of American military history. And all of that for just under $21. Quite a bargain.
Surprisingly, there are very few grease guns legally registered under the National Firearms Act, so they're a lot more expensive than you might think. That's all the time that we have for this week. If you like this show and you're not an NRA member, you need to join now. Go to AmericanRifleman.org. I'm Mark Keefe, and I'll see you next week right here on American Rifleman Television.